Welcome to an unforgettable journey through love, betrayal, and the incredible strength it takes to rebuild a life from the ashes of deceit. Imagine this. You're living what feels like the perfect marriage, until one day you stumble upon a series of clues that unravel everything you thought you knew about the person you trusted most. That's exactly what happened to Rebecca, who discovered her husband Mark's infidelity, setting off a chain reaction of lies, manipulation. But this story isn't just about heartbreak, it's about resilience, determination, and the raw power of rediscovering yourself in the face of overwhelming odds. As Rebecca pieces together the extent of Mark's betrayal, including stolen finances and a secret double life, she finds herself entangled in a battle of wills where the stakes couldn't be higher. From emotional confrontations to escalating threats, this tale is filled with twists and turns that will keep you on TE. So buckle up, because this isn't just another story. It's a roller coaster of emotions, a testament to strength, and a lesson in taking control of your life. And trust me, you won't want to miss a second of it. Let's dive into Rebecca's incredible journey and see how she fought back against the chaos to reclaim her happy. It was a quiet, snowy evening in the winter of 2018. The kind where the world outside seems wrapped in a soft white blanket, muffling all sound. Inside their cozy suburban home, nestled in the outskirts of Seattle, Rebecca and Mark sat on opposite ends of their oversized sectional couch. The crackling of the fireplace was the only noise that filled the room as Rebecca scrolled through her tablet, and Mark focused on his laptop, both immersed in their own little worlds. Rebecca had always been the type of person who noticed the small things, the way a cup of coffee steamed in the morning light, or how Mark's tie would always be slightly askew before he left for work. She was attentive, detail-oriented, and a romantic at heart. They'd been married for 8 years, long enough for those initial butterflies to give way to a comfortable rhythm, or so she thought. Mark, on the other hand, was pragmatic and driven. A regional manager at a growing tech company, his career had steadily climbed the corporate ladder, often at the expense of their personal time together. While Rebecca appreciated his ambition, she couldn't ignore the increasing distance between them. At first, she chalked it up to work stress. After all, they had their routines, their shared love for cooking Sunday breakfasts, and their annual tradition of watching old Christmas movies. But something about this winter felt different, and she couldn't shake the unease creeping in. It started subtly, as these things often do. Rebecca would wake up in the middle of the night to find Mark's side of the bed empty, his voice murmuring faintly from the downstairs office. He'd claim he was on late-night calls with overseas clients, but the vague explanations and the way he quickly shut his laptop whenever she walked in made her stomach knot. His phone, once casually left on the kitchen counter, had become an ever-present companion, always turned face down. One evening, while organizing the laundry, Rebecca noticed a strange scent clinging to Mark's dress shirt. It wasn't his usual cologne. This was floral and faintly sweet, nothing she recognized. She held the shirt for a moment, her brows furrowed, before tossing it into the washer and brushing the thought aside. "Don't be paranoid," she muttered to herself. But the little things kept adding up. It wasn't just the late nights, or the mysterious perfume Mark had started dressing differently, trading his standard polos and khakis for tailored shirts and expensive loafers. His mood had shifted too. He was distant, distracted, and sometimes irritable when she asked simple questions. Even their conversations felt stilted, like two strangers making small talk rather than a couple who once shared everything. Rebecca tried to convince herself that it was all in her head, but late at night, when the house was still and her thoughts ran wild, she couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that their marriage was slipping through her fingers. One Friday night, Rebecca decided to confront the growing distance. She prepared Mark's favorite dinner, filet mignon with garlic butter mashed potatoes, and set the table with candles, hoping to recapture a moment of intimacy. When Mark walked through the door, she greeted him with a warm smile. "Hey, I thought we could have a nice dinner tonight, just the two of us," she said, her voice light but hopeful. Mark hesitated at the door, his phone in hand. "That sounds great. but I've got a few emails to finish up first, he replied, his tone distracted. Rebecca's heart sank, but she nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. Okay, I'll keep it warm. The dinner sat untouched for over an hour before Mark finally joined her, his expression tense. They ate in near silence, the clinking of cutlery on plates filling the void where their conversations used to be. Rebecca tried to engage him, asking about his day, but his responses were clipped and vague. After dinner, Rebecca cleaned up while Mark retreated to his office, the door clicking shut behind him. She stood in the dimly lit kitchen, her hands gripping the edge of the sink, trying to steady her breathing. The house felt emptier than ever, despite him being just a room away. Things came to a head the following week. Rebecca had been tidying up the living room when she noticed Mark's laptop bag on the coffee table, slightly unzipped. Something caught her eye, a folded piece of paper sticking out of the front pocket. She hesitated, her heart pounding in her chest, before slowly pulling it out. It was a receipt from a restaurant she didn't recognize. The date on it was last Thursday, the same night Mark had told her he was working late at the office. The total was high, far more than a solo dinner, and at the bottom was a handwritten note. Looking forward to next time. Emily. Rebecca stared at the note, her mind racing. Her hands trembled as she carefully put the receipt back and zipped up the bag. Her throat felt tight, and tears pricked the corners of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not yet. That evening, she watched Mark carefully, noting every move he made. He was cheerful, unusually so, as if the weight he'd been carrying had suddenly lifted. Rebecca forced a smile, hiding the storm brewing inside her. Rebecca couldn't sleep that night. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Mark's rhythmic breathing beside her doing nothing to quiet her mind. The receipt, Emily's note, it all felt too real to dismiss as coincidence or paranoia. The man she had loved for years was hiding something, and the weight of it pressed down on her chest like a physical burden. The next morning, Mark left early for a client meeting. Rebecca's mind raced with possibilities as she sipped her coffee, staring blankly at the kitchen table. She knew she couldn't sit idly by. If Mark was lying to her, she needed to know the truth, not for closure, but for clarity, for herself. She decided to start simple. That day, Rebecca went to the restaurant on the receipt. It was a cozy Italian place downtown, the kind that had soft lighting, intimate booths, and a wine list longer than the menu. Standing at the hostess stand, Rebecca's nerves nearly got the best of her, but she steeled herself and approached the woman behind the podium. Hi, I think my husband might have been here recently, Rebecca began, her voice trembling. She fished out the crumpled receipt from her pocket and held it out. Do you recognize this? The hostess glanced at the receipt, her expression neutral. I'm not sure, she said, hesitating. But I can ask the server who worked that night. Just a moment. Rebecca waited, her heart pounding in her chest. When the hostess returned, she was accompanied by a young server who looked vaguely familiar. Oh yeah, the server said, glancing at the receipt. I remember this. They were here last week. Your husband and a woman with blonde hair. They seemed close. The words hit Rebecca like a punch to the gut. She nodded, barely managing to thank them before slipping out of the restaurant, her vision blurry with unshed tears. The confirmation of her fears was devastating, but part of her felt almost relieved to finally have an answer, even if it wasn't the one she'd wanted. Rebecca spent the next few days in a fog, going through the motions of her daily routine while her mind churned with doubt and anger. She thought about confronting Mark outright, but stopped herself. If he had been lying to her for this long, what were the chances he'd come clean now? She needed more evidence. It was during one of these sleepless nights that Rebecca decided to take a closer look at Mark's behavior. She started paying attention to the little details, the times he left the house, the names he dropped in conversations, the faint perfume that lingered on his clothes. She even checked his phone when he left it unattended, but it was always locked. The password was something she didn't recognize, another small betrayal in a growing list. Finally, Rebecca decided to take the boldest step yet. One Friday evening, when Mark said he had to work late, Rebecca followed him. She parked her car a block away and watched as he entered a downtown hotel, her stomach twisting in knots. From her vantage point, Rebecca saw Mark meet a woman in the lobby. The two embraced briefly before disappearing into the elevator. Rebecca didn't wait to see where they went. Her chest heaved with a mix of rage and heartbreak as she drove away. The image of their embrace burned into her mind. The confrontation happened the next morning. Rebecca didn't even wait for Mark to finish his coffee before she laid the hotel keycard she'd found in his pocket on the kitchen table. Mark's face went pale. "Where did you get that?" he stammered, his voice laced with panic. "I think the better question is, why do you have it?" Rebecca shot back, her voice trembling with controlled anger. "And don't lie to me, Mark. I already know about Emily." Mark froze, his mouth opening and closing as if searching for the right words. "It's not what you think," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. Rebecca laughed bitterly, crossing her arms. "Really? Because what I think is that you've been sneaking around with another woman while I've been sitting here, trying to keep our marriage from falling apart." Mark dropped his gaze to the floor, his shoulders slumping. "I didn't mean for it to happen," he murmured. "It just did. Work was stressful, and she understood me in a way I—" "Don't you dare," Rebecca interrupted, her voice sharp. "Don't you dare try to justify this as my fault." For the first time, anger flashed across Mark's face. "You think I wanted this?" he snapped. "Do you have any idea how hard it's been, coming home to this void you've been distant to, Rebecca? We've both been miserable, but I'm the only one who did something about it." Rebecca felt like the air had been knocked out of her. His words cut deep, but they also ignited something inside her. A fierce determination not to let him rewrite their history to justify his betrayal. As the days passed, the cracks in their marriage turned into an unbridgeable chasm. Rebecca and Mark avoided each other, their once shared home now feeling like a battleground. Mark continued his late nights, while Rebecca began planning her next steps. Despite the pain, Rebecca found solace in small acts of reclaiming her independence. She reconnected with friends she had drifted away from, took up painting, a hobby she had abandoned years ago, and began focusing on herself for the first time in years. And through it all, Rebecca documented her journey, turning to an unexpected outlet: her phone's camera. She started sharing snippets of her story online, not to air dirty laundry, but to process her emotions and, perhaps, to help others who had gone through similar heartbreak. One day, she uploaded a video explaining her situation, her voice steady despite the rawness of her emotions. "If you've ever been in a relationship where trust was broken," she said, "just know you're not alone. And if you've ever felt like you lost yourself in the process, remember, there's always a way to find your way back." The response was overwhelming. Comments poured in from viewers who shared their own stories, offering support and encouragement. For the first time in weeks, Rebecca didn't feel completely alone. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you're new here, consider subscribing so you don't miss the next chapter in this journey. Rebecca's days became a whirlwind of quiet defiance and calculated planning. Each passing moment brought her closer to a breaking point she couldn't avoid. And yet, she felt an odd sense of clarity in her chaos. The truth had hurt, but it had also freed her from the limbo she'd been living in for months. She could no longer deny it. Her marriage was over. Now, it was time to face that reality head-on. Mark's behavior had grown increasingly erratic since their confrontation. He alternated between cold indifference and feeble attempts at reconciliation. Though neither approach seemed genuine, Rebecca began to see him for who he truly was, a man desperate to control a situation he had already lost. The house, once a symbol of their shared life, now felt like a prison. Every corner carried memories she wanted to escape, but Rebecca knew she couldn't leave without ensuring she came out of this stronger. If Mark thought she was going to crumble, he was in for a rude awakening. One evening, as Mark paced the living room on yet another hushed phone call, Rebecca made her move. She had been quietly gathering information for weeks: bank statements, phone records, even old receipts. With every document, the picture became clearer. Mark hadn't just been unfaithful, he'd been using their joint resources to fund his double life. Rebecca had also discovered something even more damning. Emily, the woman Mark had been seeing, wasn't just a co-worker. She was a key player in a business deal Mark had been orchestrating behind closed doors, a deal that Rebecca suspected wasn't entirely above board. Sitting at the dining table, Rebecca calmly sifted through the stack of evidence she had compiled. It was a meticulous collection, each piece fitting neatly into a puzzle Mark never intended her to see. She didn't know exactly how she would use it yet, but one thing was certain. Mark's web of lies was about to unravel. The pivotal moment came on a cold Saturday afternoon. Mark had left early, claiming he needed to attend a networking event. Rebecca, however, knew better. She had tracked his car to an upscale hotel downtown, the same one she had seen him at weeks before. This time, she wasn't going to stay in the shadows. Dressed in a sleek black coat and armed with her folder of evidence, Rebecca marched into the hotel lobby. Her heart pounded as she approached the front desk, but she steadied herself with a deep breath. "Excuse me," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I'm looking for Mark. He's meeting someone here." The receptionist hesitated, her eyes flicking to a screen before giving Rebecca a polite smile. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I can't give out guest information." Rebecca nodded, expecting the answer. "I understand," she said, sliding a folded piece of paper across the desk. "But if you happen to see him, can you let him know his wife is looking for him?" The receptionist's expression faltered as she unfolded the paper, revealing a printed screenshot of Mark's texts with Emily. Rebecca gave her a pointed look before turning on her heel and heading for the elevator. She didn't wait for permission. Rebecca found them in a private lounge on the hotel's top floor. The room was dimly lit, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city skyline. Mark and Emily sat at a small table, their heads close as they reviewed something on a tablet. Mark looked up just as Rebecca stepped inside. His expression froze, shifting rapidly from shock to anger. "Rebecca, what are you doing here?" Emily's eyes widened, and she leaned back in her chair, clearly caught off guard. Rebecca ignored her, her gaze fixed on Mark. "I could ask you the same thing," she said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. Mark stood, his hands outstretched in a placating gesture. "This isn't what it looks like," he began, but Rebecca cut him off with a sharp laugh. "Save it," she snapped, pulling out the folder from her bag and tossing it onto the table. The papers spilled out. Photos, receipts, bank statements, and more. "I know everything, Mark. The lies, the money, the affair, all of it." Emily glanced nervously at the documents, her face pale. Mark's jaw tightened, his carefully constructed facade beginning to crack. "Rebecca, let's talk about this somewhere private," he said, his voice low and strained. "This seems private enough," Rebecca replied, folding her arms, "unless you're worried about what your business partner here might think." Emily stiffened, and for a moment, the room was silent. Then, Mark's temper flared. "You have no right to be here," he snapped, his voice rising. "You're overreacting." "Overreacting?" Rebecca's voice was icy. "You've been lying to me for months, Mark. Do you even hear yourself?" The argument escalated, their voices echoing off the lounge's sleek walls. Emily, clearly uncomfortable, grabbed her bag and slipped out the door, leaving Mark to face Rebecca's fury alone. The confrontation was a turning point for Rebecca. As she walked out of the hotel that evening, her chest heaving with a mix of anger and relief, she realized something had shifted. She wasn't afraid of Mark anymore. Not his lies, not his temper, and certainly not his attempts to control her. Back home, Rebecca began laying the groundwork for her next move. She met with a lawyer, explaining her situation and presenting the evidence she had collected. Her lawyer, a sharp and empathetic woman named Dana, listened carefully before outlining Rebecca's options. "This won't be easy," Dana said, her tone kind but firm. "But you've done the hard part already. You've taken back control. Now we just need to make it official." Meanwhile, Mark was unraveling the confrontation at the hotel had shaken him, and Rebecca's newfound confidence only made him more volatile. He alternated between pleading with her to stay and lashing out in anger, but Rebecca remained resolute. She had spent too long bending to his will, and she wasn't about to back down now. Rebecca's friends and family rallied around her, offering support and encouragement as she navigated the messy process of untangling her life from Mark's. Each step forward felt like a victory: filing for divorce, moving her belongings into a new apartment, and taking control of her finances. Through it all, Rebecca continued documenting her journey online, her videos resonating with viewers who admired her strength and resilience. "Sometimes, hitting rock bottom is the best thing that can happen," she said in one video, her voice steady, "because it forces you to rebuild stronger." Rebecca's world seemed to shift into high gear as the tension in her life reached its peak. Every day felt like a chess match, each move calculated to ensure she could outmaneuver Mark and reclaim her life. The confrontation at the hotel had exposed the cracks in Mark's carefully constructed facade, but Rebecca knew he wasn't finished. If anything, his desperation made him more dangerous. The final straw came late one night. Rebecca was alone in her apartment, enjoying a rare moment of peace. She had just settled onto the couch with a glass of wine when her phone buzzed with an incoming text. It was from an unknown number, but the message made her blood run cold. "You think you've won? But this isn't over? I'll make sure you regret this." Rebecca's hands trembled as she stared at the screen. She knew it had to be Mark. It was just like him to lash out when he felt cornered. But this wasn't just a petty threat. It was a reminder of how far he was willing to go to maintain control. Instead of panicking, Rebecca took a deep breath and forwarded the message to her lawyer. "Add this to the file," she wrote, her fingers steady, despite the storm brewing inside her. "I'm done playing his games." The next morning, Rebecca met with Dana to finalize their legal strategy. They were preparing for a court hearing that would determine the division of assets. But Rebecca was more concerned about the restraining order Dana had advised her to file. "This isn't just about protecting your finances," Dana explained, her tone firm. "It's about protecting yourself. Mark's behavior is escalating, and we need to take it seriously." Rebecca nodded, her jaw set. She had spent too long feeling powerless, but now she had the tools to fight back. With Dana's help, she filed the necessary paperwork and prepared herself for the next battle. Meanwhile, Mark was unraveling the cracks in his professional life were starting to show, and his colleagues were beginning to notice. His once charming demeanor had been replaced by a volatile temper, and whispers about his questionable business practices were circulating through the office. Mark's relationship with Emily had also taken a turn. The stress of the ongoing legal battle had driven a wedge between them, and Emily was beginning to see a side of Mark she didn't like. Their once cozy romance now felt more like a transactional arrangement, and Emily wasn't sure how much longer she could tolerate his erratic behavior. One evening, as they argued in the parking lot of her apartment complex, Emily finally snapped. "This isn't what I signed up for, Mark," she said, her voice trembling with frustration. "You told me you had everything under control, but it's clear you don't." Mark's face darkened, but he said nothing as Emily turned and walked away, leaving him standing alone under the harsh glow of the streetlights. The climactic moment came during the court hearing. Rebecca arrived early, dressed in a sleek navy suit that exuded confidence. She clutched a folder of evidence in her hands, her heart pounding as she took her seat beside Dana. Across the room, Mark sat with his lawyer, his face a mask of irritation. The hearing was tense from the start. Mark's lawyer tried to paint Rebecca as vindictive and unreasonable, but Dana was quick to dismantle their arguments with calm precision. When it was Rebecca's turn to speak, she took a deep breath and told her story. She spoke about the years of trust she had invested in Mark, the betrayal she had uncovered, and the lengths he had gone to in order to deceive her. Her voice was steady, but her words carried the weight of her pain and determination. The judge listened intently, his expression unreadable. When Mark was called to testify, his composure cracked. He stumbled over his words, his frustration boiling over as Dana methodically presented the evidence against him. The texts, the financial records, the threatening message, each piece was a nail in the coffin of Mark's credibility. By the end of the hearing, it was clear that the tide had turned in Rebecca's favor. The judge ruled in her favor, granting her the restraining order and awarding her the larger share of their remaining assets. As the gavel struck, Rebecca felt a wave of relief wash over her. It wasn't just a legal victory, it was a victory for herself. Outside the courtroom, Rebecca stood with Dana, the cool breeze carrying away the weight of the day. "You did it," Dana said with a smile. "You took back your life." Rebecca nodded, her eyes brimming with tears of gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you," she replied. As she walked to her car, Rebecca felt a sense of closure she hadn't thought possible. The battle had been long and grueling, but she had emerged stronger, wiser, and ready to embrace a future that was truly her own. As Rebecca drove home from the courthouse, the gravity of what she had just accomplished began to sink in. For the first time in what felt like years, she felt lighter. The battle with Mark had consumed so much of her energy and focus, but now, standing on the other side of it, she realized just how far she had come. But there was still unfinished business. Mark's veiled threats and erratic behavior weren't just going to vanish overnight. Rebecca knew he wouldn't give up easily. His ego wouldn't allow it. And while she had won the legal fight, she couldn't afford to let her guard down. The first sign of trouble came just days after the court ruling. Rebecca returned to her apartment one evening to find the lock on her door had been tampered with. The door still opened, but there were deep scratches around the keyhole, as though someone had tried, and failed, to break in. Her stomach twisted with unease, but she refused to let fear take over. Instead, she called the building manager to report the incident and arranged to have the locks changed immediately. She also notified the police, ensuring the incident was on record in case Mark was behind it. Still, the incident served as a stark reminder that her fight wasn't over. Meanwhile, Mark was spiraling. Losing the court case had been a blow to his pride, but what stung even more was the realization that he was no longer in control. His attempts to intimidate Rebecca had backfired spectacularly, and his professional reputation was in shambles. Desperate to regain some sense of power, Mark began lashing out in increasingly reckless ways. He sent a barrage of emails to Rebecca, alternating between angry rants and desperate pleas for forgiveness. Rebecca didn't respond, forwarding each one to Dana instead. Mark's behavior was becoming erratic enough that even Emily distanced herself. Their once passionate affair had fizzled into resentment and frustration, and Emily wanted no part in Mark's personal drama. One night, she ended things over a curt phone call. "You need to figure your life out, Mark," she said bluntly. "I'm done being a part of this mess." Mark was left alone, angry, and spiraling further into self-destruction. The breaking point came one rainy evening. Rebecca was returning from a late dinner with friends, the city lights shimmering on the wet pavement. As she pulled into her parking garage, she noticed a shadowy figure lurking near her car. Her heart skipped a beat, but she forced herself to stay calm. She parked her car and quickly dialed 911, her voice steady as she explained the situation. "There's someone in my parking garage. I think it might be my ex-husband," she said, glancing at the figure as it moved closer. The operator assured her that officers were on their way. Rebecca stayed in her car, locking the doors and gripping her phone tightly. The figure stepped into the light, and her worst fears were confirmed. It was Mark. He looked disheveled, his face a mask of anger and desperation. "Rebecca!" he shouted, his voice echoing through the garage. "We need to talk." She didn't respond, instead keeping her eyes on him as she mentally rehearsed her next move. When Mark realized she wasn't going to get out of the car, his frustration boiled over. He slammed his fist against the hood, shouting incoherently. Moments later, the sound of approaching sirens filled the air. Mark froze, his head snapping toward the garage entrance as two police cars pulled in. The officers quickly exited their vehicles, shouting commands as they approached him. "Step away from the car," one of them ordered, her voice firm. Mark hesitated, his hands twitching at his sides, before finally raising them in surrender. Rebecca watched as the officers handcuffed him and led him away, her heart pounding in her chest. Relief flooded her as she realized the immediate danger had passed, but the emotional toll of the encounter lingered. The incident marked a turning point for Rebecca. With Mark in custody, she felt a sense of closure she hadn't thought possible. She knew he would face legal consequences for his actions, and while it didn't erase the pain he had caused, it allowed her to finally move forward without fear. Rebecca threw herself into rebuilding her life with renewed determination. She continued to document her journey online, sharing her experiences with honesty and vulnerability. Her story resonated with countless viewers who admired her strength and resilience, and her channel quickly grew into a supportive community. Through therapy and the support of her friends and family, Rebecca began to heal. She rediscovered her love for painting, filled her new apartment with vibrant artwork, and even started volunteering at a local shelter. Each small victory felt like a step toward reclaiming her identity. Months later, as Rebecca stood in her living room, surrounded by friends who had come to celebrate her new beginning, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had taught her the importance of self-worth and the power of resilience. Raising a glass, she smiled at her friends and said, "Here's to new beginnings, and to never settling for less than we deserve." Her friends cheered, their laughter filling the room, and for the first time in a long time, Rebecca felt truly free. The weeks following Mark's arrest were a whirlwind for Rebecca. The restraining order had been reinforced, and Mark's actions had added criminal charges to his growing list of legal troubles. But even with him physically out of her life, the emotional scars he left behind lingered like a shadow over her newfound freedom. Rebecca knew she couldn't just move on. She had to truly confront the past to reclaim her peace. Rebecca decided to attend a support group for individuals who had experienced emotional abuse. At first, the idea intimidated her. Sharing her story with strangers felt too vulnerable, too raw. But when she stepped into the small, sunlit room and was greeted by a circle of kind, understanding faces, she realized she wasn't alone. Each person had their own story of heartbreak, betrayal, and resilience, and listening to them helped Rebecca find the courage to share her own. As she spoke, her voice steady but laced with emotion, Rebecca felt an unexpected sense of relief. The weight she had been carrying for so long seemed to lift, even if just slightly. She found solace in the group's shared strength, and for the first time, she began to feel hopeful about the future. Meanwhile, Mark's unraveling continued in court. His once pristine reputation had been thoroughly tarnished, and he found himself alienated from his colleagues and former friends. The legal system had taken its toll on him financially and emotionally, but Mark's pride wouldn't let him admit defeat. Instead, he doubled down on his narrative of victimhood, blaming Rebecca for his downfall. His attempts to control the narrative reached a breaking point during a final court hearing. Mark tried to frame himself as the wronged party, but his erratic behavior and the overwhelming evidence against him only solidified the judge's ruling in Rebecca's favor. Watching him struggle to maintain his composure, Rebecca felt a mix of pity and triumph. She had spent so long fearing Mark, but now she saw him for what he truly was, a deeply flawed man who had lost everything because of his own choices. As Rebecca continued to rebuild her life, she started to embrace new opportunities. Her online platform had grown into a thriving community, and brands began reaching out to collaborate with her. What had started as a personal outlet had turned into a source of empowerment, not just for Rebecca, but for countless others who saw themselves in her story. One of her most significant milestones came when she was invited to speak at a local women's conference. Standing on stage in front of a packed auditorium, Rebecca felt a surge of nerves, but she reminded herself of why she was there. Her story mattered, not because it was unique, but because it was universal. "I'm not here to tell you that everything will magically get better," she said, her voice resonating through the room. "But I am here to tell you that you're stronger than you think, that no matter how broken you feel, there's a way to rebuild, and that starts with believing you deserve better." The audience erupted into applause, and Rebecca felt a swell of pride. She had turned her pain into purpose, and it was a feeling unlike any she had ever known. Despite the progress she had made, Rebecca still struggled with moments of doubt and fear. The scars from her past weren't easily forgotten, and there were days when the memories threatened to pull her under. But each time she felt herself faltering, she turned to the people who had supported her through it all, her friends, her family, and the community she had built online. One evening, as Rebecca sat on her balcony watching the sun dip below the horizon, she reflected on how far she had come. The woman who had once felt trapped and powerless was now stronger, more confident, and ready to face whatever came next. She knew her journey wasn't over, but she was finally in control of her own story. The climax of Rebecca's journey came in the form of a letter. It arrived unexpectedly one afternoon, tucked among the usual pile of bills and advertisements. The return address was from a state correctional facility. She didn't need to open it to know who it was from. Rebecca hesitated, her fingers trembling slightly as she unfolded the letter. Mark's handwriting was neat, almost formal, and the tone of his words was both apologetic and self-serving. He acknowledged his mistakes, but the letter felt more like an attempt to garner sympathy than a genuine apology. Rebecca read the letter once, then set it down. She didn't feel anger or sadness, only a quiet resolve. She had spent too much of her life caught up in Mark's chaos, and she wasn't about to let him drag her back into it. She tucked the letter into a drawer, deciding that it didn't deserve a place in her new life. In the months that followed, Rebecca continued to thrive. She started a new job at a nonprofit organization, using her platform to advocate for others who had experienced similar struggles. Her work brought her a sense of fulfillment she hadn't felt in years, and she threw herself into it wholeheartedly. Rebecca also began to open her heart to the possibility of love again. It wasn't easy. Trusting someone after everything she had been through felt like an impossible task. But when she met Daniel, a kind and patient man who shared her passion for helping others, she felt a spark she hadn't expected. Their relationship was slow and steady, built on a foundation of mutual respect and understanding. Daniel didn't try to fix Rebecca's scars. He simply accepted them as part of who she was. And for Rebecca, that was more than enough. The final pivotal moment came during a quiet evening at Rebecca's apartment. She sat with Daniel, flipping through an old scrapbook she had rediscovered while unpacking. As they turned the pages, Rebecca found herself smiling at the memories she had once thought were lost. "This was me before everything," she said, pointing to a photo of herself laughing with friends. "I didn't think I'd ever find that version of myself again." Daniel took her hand, his gaze steady. "Maybe you're not the same person," he said. "But that doesn't mean you're not whole." Rebecca nodded, her heart full. She had faced the darkest moments of her life and come out stronger, and now, she was ready to embrace whatever the future held. As Rebecca's life continued its upward climb, there was one lingering challenge she couldn't avoid: closing the chapter with Mark for good. Despite the victories she'd achieved, personally, legally, and emotionally, Mark remained a shadow in her life, a constant reminder of the chaos she'd fought so hard to overcome. One rainy afternoon, Rebecca received a call from Dana, her lawyer. "You're not going to believe this," Dana said, her voice tinged with exasperation. "Mark's filed an appeal." Rebecca's heart sank. "An appeal for what?" "He's claiming that the asset division was unfair and that you influenced the court with false evidence," Dana explained. "It's a long shot, but he's clearly trying to drag this out." Rebecca sighed, the familiar weight of Mark's manipulations pressing down on her. But instead of panicking, she steadied herself. She had come too far to let Mark pull her back into his games. "What's our next move?" she asked, her voice calm. Dana outlined their plan, reassuring Rebecca that the appeal was weak and unlikely to succeed. Still, it meant another court date, more paperwork, and more time spent dealing with the man she had fought so hard to leave behind. In the days leading up to the hearing, Rebecca prepared herself emotionally and mentally. She leaned on her support system, confiding in her friends and attending her support group for guidance. She also revisited the evidence she had gathered, ensuring that every detail was accounted for. On the morning of the hearing, Rebecca dressed with purpose. Her sleek black suit and understated jewelry were a reflection of her newfound confidence. As she stood in front of the mirror, she took a deep breath, reminding herself of how far she had come. "You've got this," she whispered to herself before heading out the door. The hearing was tense from the start. Mark's lawyer presented a convoluted argument, trying to paint Rebecca as manipulative and deceitful. But Rebecca and Dana were prepared. They countered each claim with clear, concise evidence, dismantling Mark's case, piece by piece. As Rebecca sat in the courtroom, listening to Mark's lawyer grasp at straws, she couldn't help but feel a sense of detachment. The man sitting across from her, the one who had once been her partner, her confidant, now felt like a stranger. His bitterness and desperation were palpable, but they no longer had power over her. When it was Rebecca's turn to speak, she addressed the court with poise and clarity. She recounted her journey, emphasizing the importance of the truth and the impact of Mark's actions on her life. Her words were measured, but they carried the weight of her experiences, and the courtroom fell silent as she spoke. By the end of the hearing, it was clear where the judge's decision would land. Mark's appeal was dismissed, and the original ruling was upheld. Rebecca left the courthouse with a renewed sense of closure, the chapter with Mark finally drawing to a definitive end. With the legal battles behind her, Rebecca turned her focus fully to the future. She continued to grow her online platform, using it as a tool to empower others who had faced similar struggles. Her videos resonated deeply with her audience, and she found joy in connecting with people who shared their stories and found strength in hers. Rebecca also deepened her relationship with Daniel. Their connection was built on trust and mutual respect, and for the first time in years, Rebecca felt truly seen and valued. They took things slowly, savoring the process of building a life together without rushing into anything. One evening, as they walked along the beach, Daniel stopped and turned to Rebecca. "I know we've both been through a lot," he said, his voice steady. "But I want you to know that I'm here for you, no matter what." Rebecca smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. "And I'm here for you," she replied, "no matter what." The final turning point in Rebecca's journey came when she was invited to speak at a national conference on resilience and empowerment. Standing on a grand stage in front of thousands of people, Rebecca reflected on her incredible transformation. Her speech was raw and honest, weaving together the darkest moments of her life with the lessons she had learned along the way. She spoke about the importance of self-worth, the power of community, and the resilience that had carried her through the storm. "When life knocks you down," she said, her voice ringing with conviction, "you have two choices: stay down or get back up. And getting back up doesn't mean you have to do it alone. It means finding the strength within yourself and leaning on the people who believe in you." The audience erupted into applause, and Rebecca felt a sense of fulfillment that words couldn't capture. She had turned her pain into purpose, and in doing so, she had found herself. Back at home, Rebecca celebrated her newfound freedom with a quiet evening on her balcony. The city lights twinkled in the distance as she sipped her tea, reflecting on everything she had been through. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had shaped her into the person she was today, strong, resilient, and ready for whatever came next. For anyone who's ever felt like the odds were stacked against you, remember this: you are stronger than you think, and your story isn't over yet. If Rebecca's journey resonated with you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more inspiring stories. Your support means the world, and we can't wait to share the next chapter with you. Rebecca's life had taken a turn she never imagined. From the chaos of her past, she had built a life filled with purpose and strength. But just when she thought the storm had finally settled, the climax of her journey arrived in an unexpected and explosive way. One late evening, Rebecca was wrapping up a live stream with her online community. Her channel had grown into a sanctuary for people seeking inspiration and empowerment, and she found joy in connecting with others who had faced adversity. Tonight's topic had been about setting boundaries, a lesson Rebecca had learned the hard way. As she signed off, thanking her viewers for their support, her phone buzzed on the desk. It was a text message, but the sender was listed as unknown. Frowning, Rebecca opened it. "You think you've won, but I'm not done yet." Her heart sank. The words were chillingly familiar, echoing the threats she'd received from Mark months earlier. But Mark was behind bars, serving time for his repeated violations of the restraining order. There was no way he could have sent this, or so she thought. Rebecca quickly forwarded the message to Dana and her local police contact, explaining the situation. They reassured her that the message was likely an empty threat, perhaps even a prank. But Rebecca's instincts told her otherwise. The timing was too precise, the words too personal. Determined not to let fear control her, Rebecca reviewed her security measures that night. She double-checked her apartment's locks, tested her new security cameras, and made sure her emergency contacts were up to date. While she had taken every precaution, the memory of Mark's unpredictable behavior loomed large. The next day, Rebecca visited the local police station, hoping to gain more clarity. As she sat across from Officer Ramirez, the same officer who had handled Mark's arrest months earlier, she recounted the details of the message. "We're running a trace on the number," Ramirez said, his tone calm but serious. "It might take some time, but we'll get to the bottom of this. In the meantime, keep doing what you're doing. Stay vigilant." Rebecca nodded, grateful for his support but unable to shake the feeling of unease. She couldn't help but wonder, if this wasn't Mark, then who was trying to frighten her? The answer came sooner than she expected. That evening, Rebecca returned home to find an envelope taped to her front door. Her name was scrawled across the front in messy handwriting, and her hands shook as she pulled it down. Inside was a single photograph, a candid shot of her and Daniel at a nearby cafe, taken just days ago. Rebecca's blood ran cold. Whoever had sent the message wasn't just trying to scare her, they were watching her. She immediately called Daniel, her voice trembling as she explained what had happened. "I don't know who's doing this, but they're escalating," she said. "I can't take any chances." Daniel, ever the steady presence in her life, reassured her. "We'll figure this out together," he said firmly. "You're not facing this alone." The next few days were a blur of tension and vigilance. Rebecca and Daniel reported the photo to the police, who added it to their investigation. Rebecca also informed her online community, cautioning her viewers about the importance of personal safety and privacy. Despite her fear, Rebecca refused to let the situation derail her progress. She continued her work, balancing her growing platform with her advocacy efforts, but the sense of being watched never left her. Every shadow, every unfamiliar face in a crowd felt like a potential threat. The turning point came on a stormy night. Rebecca was home alone, editing a video, when the power suddenly cut out. The apartment plunged into darkness, and for a moment, all she could hear was the pounding rain against the windows. Her stomach knotted as she reached for her phone, using the flashlight to navigate through the now darkened apartment. She checked the circuit breaker, but nothing seemed out of place. Just as she was about to call the power company, she heard a noise, a faint creak, like footsteps, coming from the hallway. Rebecca froze, her heart hammering in her chest. She strained to listen, her phone's flashlight trembling in her hand. Another creak echoed through the apartment, closer this time. Summoning every ounce of courage, Rebecca grabbed a nearby object, a heavy lamp, and crept toward the source of the noise. Her breath came in shallow gasps, but her grip on the lamp was firm. As she reached the hallway, she saw a figure moving in the shadows. "Who's there?" she demanded, her voice steady, despite the fear coursing through her. The figure stepped into the beam of her flashlight, and Rebecca's grip tightened on the lamp. It was a man she didn't recognize, tall, wiry, with a sinister gleam in his eyes. "You've been making things difficult," he said, his voice low and menacing. "Mark sends his regards." Rebecca didn't wait to hear more. She swung the lamp with all her strength, the heavy base connecting with the intruder's arm. He stumbled back, cursing in pain, but Rebecca didn't stop. She screamed for help, her voice echoing through the apartment as she swung the lamp again. The commotion startled the man, and he turned to flee, but not before Rebecca's security camera captured his face. She watched as he disappeared into the stormy night, her chest heaving with adrenaline. Within minutes, the police arrived, their flashing lights illuminating the rain-soaked street. Rebecca recounted the events with a shaky voice, showing them the footage from her camera. "You did everything right," Officer Ramirez said, his tone reassuring. "We'll find him, and if he's connected to Mark, this will only strengthen the case against him." The incident marked a turning point for Rebecca. While the fear lingered, so did her resolve. She wasn't the same woman she had been when Mark first tried to manipulate her. She was stronger now, and she refused to let anyone take that strength away. With Daniel's support and the ongoing investigation providing some reassurance, Rebecca focused on fortifying her life. She upgraded her security system, added protective measures to her online presence, and continued sharing her journey with her community. The ordeal became a powerful lesson in resilience and self-empowerment. Rebecca's message to her followers became even more poignant. No matter how dark things get, you have the power to fight back. You have the power to reclaim your life. The climax of Rebecca's story was far from over, but she faced it with unshakable determination. She had come too far to let fear dictate her future, and she knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them head-on, with courage, resilience, and the unwavering belief that she was in control of her own destiny. The stormy night that brought a stranger to Rebecca's door marked the final battle in her long, hard-fought journey. In the days that followed, the police used the security footage to identify the man who had broken into her apartment. It turned out he was someone Mark had known from his questionable business dealings, a desperate individual willing to do Mark's bidding in exchange for favors. With the new evidence, the case against Mark grew stronger. The courts extended Rebecca's restraining order indefinitely, and additional charges were added to Mark's already lengthy sentence. For Rebecca, this wasn't just a legal victory. It was the closure she had been seeking. Finally, the specter of Mark's influence had been extinguished, allowing her to truly move on. In the weeks after the incident, Rebecca focused on reclaiming her sense of safety and stability. She moved into a new apartment in a gated community, a place where she could finally feel secure. Daniel was by her side through it all, helping her unpack boxes, install her new security system, and add touches of warmth to her new home. "This feels different," Rebecca said one evening as they hung photos on the walls. "Like a fresh start." Daniel smiled, his hand resting gently on hers. "That's because it is," he said. "And you've earned it." Rebecca's personal growth over the past year had been transformative. The woman who once felt trapped and powerless was now a symbol of resilience, not just to herself, but to thousands of people who followed her journey online. Her platform had become a beacon of hope for others navigating their own struggles, and she took pride in the community she had built. One day, Rebecca uploaded a video titled, "The End of One Chapter, The Beginning of Another." In it, she reflected on the past year, the heartbreak, the battles, the victories, and how each challenge had shaped her into the person she was today. "If there's one thing I've learned through all of this," she said, her tone thoughtful, "it's that healing isn't linear. There are ups and downs, steps forward and backward, but every moment, every choice, brings you closer to the person you're meant to be." She ended the video with a heartfelt message to her audience. "Thank you for being part of this journey with me. Your support has meant more than I can say. If my story has helped you in any way, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And remember, you're stronger than you think." As Rebecca's life settled into its new rhythm, she found joy in the little things. Cooking dinner with Daniel, walking along the beach, painting on her balcony as the sun set. These moments, once overshadowed by fear and uncertainty, now felt vibrant and full of meaning. Her relationship with Daniel blossomed into something beautiful. They took a trip to the mountains one weekend, hiking trails and stargazing under the clear night sky. It was during one of these quiet moments that Daniel turned to her, his eyes full of warmth. "I've never met anyone as strong as you," he said. "You inspire me every day." Rebecca smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. "I wouldn't be here without you," she replied. You've shown me what love can look like when it's real and healthy. Their connection deepened with each passing day, and Rebecca allowed herself to dream about a future filled with possibility. The final scene of Rebecca's journey played out on a sunny afternoon in the park. She was surrounded by friends and family, the people who had supported her through the darkest times of her life. They laughed, shared stories, and celebrated how far she had come. Rebecca took a moment to step away from the crowd, sitting on a bench under a tree. She watched the sunlight dance through the leaves and felt a profound sense of peace. For the first time in years, she wasn't looking over her shoulder. She wasn't bracing for the next storm. She was simply present, grateful for the life she had rebuilt. She pulled out her phone and recorded a short video, her smile radiant. "This is where I am now," she said, gesturing to the scene around her. "Happy, free, and so thankful for everything that brought me here, even the hard parts, because without them, I wouldn't have learned how strong I really am." Rebecca's story is a testament to the power of resilience and the strength it takes to start over. Her journey wasn't easy, but it was worth it. And as she closed this chapter of her life, she was ready to embrace whatever came next with open arms. If Rebecca's journey has inspired you, don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more stories like this. Your support means everything, and I can't wait to share more incredible journeys with you. Until next time, take care, and remember, you're stronger than you think. With her final words to the audience, Rebecca's story came to a close, leaving behind a legacy of hope, strength, and the unshakable belief that even in the face of life's hardest moments, we have the power to rise again. Thank you for being part of this journey. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring stories. See you in the next video.